Hi friends, I'm ReRe and welcome back to Exploration Crochet. Today we're diving into one of the most iconic motifs in all of fiber arts, the granny square, or as I like to say, the granny that turned out to be anything but square. Back in the 1940s jazz scene, calling someone an L7, that's the capital letter L next to the number 7, forming a square, meant they were unhip, old-fashioned, or just plain provincial. It was slang passed through smoky clubs, record grooves, and the wider culture. In 1965, Sam the Sham and the Pharaohs cemented it in pop history with their hit Wooly Bully, with the famous line, "Let's not be L7." Later, with references I'll just let you look up on your own, Rick James and even the 1993 movie The Sandlot kept the term alive for newer generations. And here we are, decades later, celebrating the L7 of all L7s, the square of all squares, not as something unhip or outdated, but as a timeless, endlessly reinvented design. A motif that has stayed fresh, stylish, and surprisingly modern for more than a century. From early pattern books to high fashion runways, from cozy blankets on the backs of couches to playful amigurumi, the granny square has flipped the script. L7 or not, it's hip to be square. The motif we now call the granny square didn't always carry that folksy title. In the 19th century, crochet publications and home craft guides often called them patchwork squares or mosaic squares. Some Victorian manuals simply described them as motif squares, little building blocks designed to be joined into larger works. Back then, yarn was precious. People unraveled garments, recycled scraps, and stitched them into small, manageable blocks. Each square was like a small deposit into a savings account. One here, another one there, eventually enough to create a blanket. The granny name appeared and stuck later, in the early 20th century, emphasizing warmth, continuity, and tradition. After all, what better way to market a homely motif than to tie it to the love and resourcefulness of grandmothers? Fast forward to the 1960s and 70s, and suddenly granny squares broke free from their thrifty image. Granny squares strutted into pop culture on runways, TV shows, and album covers. They became fashion icons. Ponchos, halter tops, vests, even full suits hit the streets. The colors were bold. Sunflower yellows, avocado greens, psychedelic rainbows, and the vibe was pure freedom. And then came the 80s and the 90s, when the square quietly slipped out of the spotlight. Maybe Granny was huddled with her consultants, plotting a rebrand, trading ponchos and afghans while considering something fresher, waiting for just the right moment to make her comeback. And then, the internet. Granny Square suddenly had a new stage, and it was bigger than any craft circle or crocheting bee. Platforms like Ravelry, YouTube, Pinterest, Instagram didn't just showcase patterns, they catapulted them into a full-on global revival. Tutorials spread fast, and inspiration hopped borders overnight. A square dreamed up in Nairobi could spark a blanket in New York, a bag in Tokyo, and a wall hanging in Sao Paulo, all within hours. The proof is in the hashtags. Search Instagram today and you'll find millions of posts under hashtag Granny Square, with crafters proudly showing everything from vintage-inspired Afghans to bold, modern fashion. On TikTok and the YouTube's Granny Square tutorials rack up millions of views, often from makers half the age of the motif itself. Suddenly, the square wasn't just alive, it was trending. What had once been Grandma's motif transformed into something much bigger, a universal design language. One square connected beginners making their very first item, hobbyists experimenting with colors, and professional designers pushing the motif into couture and gallery-worthy installations. The granny square had become more than a stitch pattern. It was a cultural passport, proof that creativity could be shared, remixed, and celebrated across the world. And today, the granny square has continued to be exciting. Today's grannies have exploded beyond the simple clusters of 3 double crochets in a space, in the round. Modern granny squares now come in every shape imaginable: triangles, hexagons, octagons, even freeform asymmetrical designs. And they've gone 3D. Picture flowers that bloom out of the fabric, layered petals, popcorn stitches adding texture, or mandala like centers radiating color like stained glass. And let's be honest, some of the places granny squares are showing up today would probably make Granny herself blush. From crop tops and bikinis to festival wear that looks more Coachella than couch, let's just say Granny would clutch her pearls. But these motifs were never meant to be confined to couches. They're stitched into jackets, purses, hats, socks. They're even used in amigurumi, turning little squares into stuffed animals and plush creations. They've leapt off the couch and onto the wall, transformed into fiber art installations and framed decor. The granny square has become less of a motif and more of a genre, a design system that's endlessly remixable. And of course, popularity draws imitators. In the late 20th century and early 2000s, fast fashion companies began flooding the market with machine-made crochet garments, many designed to mimic granny squares. But here's the catch. Crochet can't be replicated by standard knitting machines. Every true crochet stitch is made one loop at a time by hand. Most of those granny garments on the rack weren't really crochet at all. They were either woven fabrics or machine knitting passed off as crochet. For crocheters, it was infuriating. Not only did it undervalue authentic handwork, but it confused shoppers who didn't realize what they were buying. And in many cases, behind the price tags was an even darker reality. When companies did want authentic crochet, they often outsourced it to underpaid laborers in developing countries, paying pennies for hours of intricate, skilled work. Pieces that should have cost hundreds, reflecting the true labor and artistry, were sold for fractions of that, with the makers themselves never seeing fair pay. So, the market was hit from both sides. Machine-made fakes eroding the value of crochet, while exploitative labor practices undercut the dignity of real makers. And yet, ironically, there was an unexpected silver lining. With crochet so visible, more people wanted the real thing. So they picked up a hook, watched a YouTube tutorial, and discovered the joy of making their own grannies, authentic, hand-stitched, and full of life. That's why it matters to support indie designers, fair trade crochet, and handmade work whenever you can. Every time you buy directly from a maker or stitch something yourself, you're honoring the true value of crochet and helping ensure that this art form thrives with the dignity it deserves. So, why has the granny square endured across 2 centuries? I can give you 5 reasons. 1, accessibility. Beginners can master a granny square in a day, building confidence square by square. 2, creativity. Every square is a canvas. Play with colors, stitches, texture. 3, community. Grannies connect us through swaps, collaborative blankets, and charity drives. 4, adaptability. From thrift to high fashion, from 2D to 3D, from couch throws to wall art, grannies never stay still. And finally, 5, symbolism. They embody both tradition and reinvention. Each square links us to the past while inviting us to imagine the future. Well, before we close, let's have a little fun with a what if. What if Granny had been able to copyright her square back in the 20th century? The money making opportunities would have been endless. Every crochet book, magazine, pamphlet, anything featuring the motif would have owed her royalties. The 1960s 70s fashion boom, vests, ponchos, jackets, would have meant payments on millions of items. Big brands like IKEA, Anthropologie, Free People, any fast fashion chain, all cutting Granny a check for their Granny inspired designs. Digital platforms like Etsy and Ravelry, where tens of thousands of patterns are sold, another income stream. And even pop culture. Music videos, art installations, runway shows would have been licensing deals in her favor. And what about the numbers? If Granny had charged just 10 cents per item, here's how it might have worked out. From the 1960s and 70s fashion boom, let's say about 50 million items, so that's $5 million. From 1980s to the 2000s, home decor and craft kits, let's say another 100 million items, $10 million. From 2000s to the present, indie shops, Etsy, and fast fashion, 2 million items, $20 million. That's $35 million in licensing revenue. And that's a conservative estimate. Raise the fee to $1 per item, add in interest, and Granny's fortune rockets into hundreds of millions. Forget rocking chairs and lemonade. She'd be the mogul of motifs, lounging on a yacht named something like what? The Slipknot, with knot spelled N-A-U-T. Or, if she was feeling fancy, maybe one called Yarn Voyage. But here's the truth. The Granny Square can't be trademarked or owned. It belongs to no one. And everyone. That's what makes it so powerful. This humble square has passed through countless hands across continents and decades without borders, patents, or price tags. So when you stitch a Granny Square, remember, you're adding your voice to a chorus that's been singing for generations. Not a corporate empire, but a shared cultural treasure, built on little squares of love and color. So, from patchwork squares in Victorian parlors, neon flowers blooming on Instagram, plush amigurumi sitting on a child's bed, the Granny Square has proven again and again it's hip to be square. And so, as we close, picture Granny herself, not rocking on the porch, but stretched out on the deck of the Slipknot. Champagne flute in one hand, crochet hook in the other, charting her next motif as she sails into the sunset. This has been Exploration Crochet. Thanks for listening.